This is the Conelrad Alert. Civil defense information will be broadcast at 6:40.
West of the Rockies, you're on the air. Hello.
Y2K, how can we prepare?
Stop a few of their machines and radios. Throw them into darkness for a few hours.
We are fighting for our lives. My family must survive.
For 5 years, 1,000 gallons of gas, air filtration, water filtration.
Coming at you from the frozen tundra that is East Central Alberta, Canada. Streaming live on YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, Rumble, and Odyssey. Welcome back to the workshop where we create community, find freedom, promote preparedness, and share success. I am Toolman Tim. Today is May 14th, 2023, and this is episode 308 of Workshop Radio. So, how the hell is everyone out there? We've got an incredible guest waiting in the green room this evening. I can't wait to bring him on. Two quick announcements. Let's get them out of the way, guys, and then we can get right to the conversation. So, Thrivalist Fair, if you're in Addy, Washington, May 28th, 29th, I'm going to be there speaking on a couple of different things, 4 times over 2 days. So it'll be a great time. I'm looking forward to seeing you guys there. I believe it's about $50 for the weekend for an entire family, and there's camping available on site. It's going to be some pretty cool guests. So I'd love to see you. We're going to have a workshop meetup May 28th around the fire. And I've got a special piece of swag for each of you who show up in person. It'll be a good time. Number 2, the silver guys. You know we're running our latest workshop 1.5 ounce coins. This year they're going to be $100 because the price of silver went up a bit. It's the only batch of 2023 coins we're doing. Reach out to me. It's already half gone, probably about a month before it gets here. But if you want to get on the list, let me know. I know I blasted through everything tonight, but I'm excited to bring George on. So give me 1 second here. Hey, George, how are you?
Fantastic. Thank you so much for having me on. You know, it's funny, when you said frozen tundra, it was 90 degrees today here in Tampa. It was actually a little warm, a little humid. So I just wanted you to know there is another extreme happening.
My audience, my community loves to josh with me and say that I live closer to Santa Claus than most people. Yeah. And it's true. However, it has been about 85 degrees here the last few days. So
fantastic.
And it's dry, and so it's pretty pertinent to what you're going to talk about because we've been in the cusp of wildfires lately. So, yeah, not a good thing.
No, it's not. Fire is such a scary thing because there are certain weather disasters that come at you that you can see coming, you can prepare, but the wind shifts in a fire and you can lose everything. It's frightening.
And we're right in the center of oil country here, so it kind of introduces a whole lot of oil storage and pumps, and it's a mess. But
yeah.
So you informed me earlier it's not George Siegal, it's George Siegal. So we'll get that out of the way right away. So
thank you. I was on a radio show in Chicago, and the host introduced me as George Siegal. And what do? I'm now George Siegal in Chicago. You're not going to correct
roll with it, right? You just got to be polite. So. Fill us in a little bit on, okay, we have a tradition here on the workshop. The first thing that when you give me your background, I'd love to hear what your first job was. Whatever it was you did to hustle or make money when you were a kid, because that's kind of the shtick around here that we like to find out. So
I was selling vibrating massage pillows in a mall.
I was wondering, that first word come out, and I was wondering, anyway, what was that
careful.
about?
It was just a crummy job where you had the pillow. This was the old days before you had the massage chairs and everything.
Sure.
This is like the poor man's massage chair. So it was a big piece of foam with a vibrating tool inside it. And you try to get people in the mall to buy it. And I sold none. So I left that job pretty quickly and started delivering alcohol for a liquor store. I worked in an ice cream store. I sold shoes. I had a lot of jobs that were very interesting, but I think those things are great for people. It gives you an experience of relating and dealing with people, and it gives you a new appreciation when you go in a store knowing that you've done something like that yourself.
Yeah, it does. I love hearing that. I've often heard people say that, a little bit of time in a service industry or a food service industry does people well. Hey.
Yep. I made burgers in a grill. A lot of celebrities used to come in there at the Sand and Sea Club in Southern California. Don Rickles and Bob Newhart and people like that used to come in, and I was the guy making their burgers for them.
That is cool. See,
yeah,
that's what we tune into the workshop. I love those I love hearing that. Thank you, man. So what was your background? Where'd you grow up, and how'd you get into weather forecasting and then, onto documentary filmmaking, that sort of thing?
Well, until I was 12, we lived on the East Coast, and then we moved out to California.
Okay.
And I ended up going to UCLA. When I got out of UCLA, I was a political science major in college. I really wanted to go to law school, but college taught me that I wasn't a real good student and I wasn't that smart. And you have to be able to study to become a lawyer. But I always wanted to be in television. So I drove out to Bakersfield, California, where they said they had an opening for a sportscaster because I wanted to do sports.
Okay.
And once I got there, they said, the sports job's filled. Can you do weather? And so I said, sure, I can do weather because I grew up watching Pat Sajak do weather in Southern California, and I loved him. And so I just stood in front of a map and made up a forecast, and they hired me. And then as I progressed through the industry, I kept getting hired as a weatherman. And, I'm not a meteorologist, but I learned a lot about it. You learn how to read the maps and look at forecasts and do some forecasting of your own. And I did that for 14 years until I got out of that business. Then I started making local videos, video production, marketing videos, sales videos, and then eventually documentary films.
So did you enjoy your time? Weatherman, what do we call, you're a weatherman, right? Is that okay to call you a weatherman?
Sure. Yeah, no, okay. I liked it. I didn't love it because I don't love TV news because it's an illusion. And I used to work for people at times where even when the forecast was wrong, they'd make you stand there and the anchor would pat you on the back and say, hey, you nailed another one, George. And I always felt so stupid with that because there's one thing everybody remembers that I think we all have in common. If the weatherman or weatherwoman tells you it's going to be nice and it rains on your event, you never forget that.
Ain't that the truth?
My philosophy was people aren't stupid. I would rather tell them why the forecast was wrong. But the philosophy of many of the stations that I worked for were, you are stupid, so we're going to tell you what you need to know. And that's frustrating for me. I'm pretty direct about what I say. If I have something to say, I'll tell you. And if it's not true, I'll tell you that too. But TV news isn't that way. They very and it's print and television. They make a mistake. The retraction's never the headline. It's always buried somewhere else. And so you can be wrong a lot. You can do what you want. And I just got tired of the industry. It's not something that I wanted to do for the rest of my life.
So did you start when you moved into video production and documentary filmmaking? How did you did you quit right away from being a weatherman, or did you kind of work at it as a side hustle, or how did you progress there?
Well, they made it easy for me by firing me.
Fair enough.
And you get fired if you've been in the business long enough. I've seen some of the biggest legends in the business get fired.
Sure.
And I've gotten fired a couple times, and I knew when the guy that hired me left and the guy that took his job didn't like me, the countdown clock was probably running in my head because people want their own people to put out there. So what happened at that point was I didn't want to keep moving around the country. I mean, I've moved all over the United States working in that industry, and I just got tired of it. I didn't want to do that anymore. So I just decided I have all these skills as production. I've always put together my own stories, and I was also a feature reporter and an anchor. And I said, I have all these other skills. Let me see if I can make a living with them. And so I just started doing that. I didn't want to go hopping around America anymore on the weather tour.
What year was that you moved into production?
I think it was 2001.
Okay. So digital at that point, or were you still doing film and video, or was it kind of right on the cusp?
It was videotape at the time. So when I first started in the business, we actually had to cut the tape we were using and splice it together. And then we advanced past that. People now, like my kids, if they knew what we had to do, it's like I had some old albums in my closet, and they looked at, what's that? What is that? What do you do with those? And technology has advanced so far from where we were then. We didn't have social media. If we had social media when I was on television, I think I would have been more successful because I did a lot of silly stuff that I think I could have gotten some mileage out of. But then again, if we had social media when I was in college, I'd probably be in jail and never would have gotten a job. So, there's the good and the bad of it. I don't know how this current generation exists and gets away with the things they do with how things are so accessible.
I just think of the things we did. I know everybody jokes, but the shit we did in high school and junior high, if we'd have recorded that, my mom would have had a heart attack. And like you said, we'd ended up in jail. So.
Yeah. And it's so in a way I try to understand, okay, it's tough for kids today because everything is magnified. It used to be when we were kids, if you wanted to get mad at somebody, you had to ride over to their house. If somebody was being bullied, you physically had to show up and do the work. Now you can cyberbully, you can do horrible things online to people, and we can joke about it, but it's horrible what kids do to each other in so many different examples. And having kids, I don't know if you have kids, it's even less funny when it's your children. It's like, oh my God, I got to deal with this stuff.
Do you have kids?
I do. I have 5 kids.
I have 5 as well. What do you have?
I have 3 boys and 2 girls. What about you?
I got 4 girls and a boy. So
okay,
that's 5's a good number. Are you good with? I never asked you, so I'm just going. Are you good with questions from the audience as we go along?
I love questions from the audience. Absolutely.
I'm just going to bring this up for now, just so we get it out of the way. But we talked about our mutual friend Nat, which is cool because we didn't hook up through Nat. It came through a third party, which was great. So Nat, the preparedness guy, he says, this is surreal for me. I've met Tim and George in person and worked with both on projects. This is like a collision of 2 of my worlds. Good mashup. I'm excited for this.
Yeah, he's a great guy, and his videos are so creative. It's like you see this guy, and I thought he was really looked really conservative and straight-laced, and then I started watching his videos and hearing the things that he would say and all the knowledge that he has. I mean, it was one of the most fun things I've done is getting to spend a couple of days around him and see the kind of stuff he does, and it made me want to raise my game in the videos that I do. But it's hard to be at his level. He's great. He's good,
and I tell him this. It looks like he doesn't even try. So I mean, and it's just natural with him. I appreciate that. And he did a great presentation at Prepper Camp where his opening line was, "I'm from the government and I'm here to help." That goes over really well.
I'm sure.
So your passion. So I took some time and watched The Last House Standing. Is that correct? Was that the name of it? Yes. I want to call it The Last House on the Left. And I'm like, no, that's a 70s, exploitative horror movie. So, but it's an apt-named documentary. I loved it. It was right up my alley. So you're rather passionate about preparedness and being prepared before the storm, hey?
Absolutely. And it comes from my years in the news business, and it comes before that, growing up in earthquake country and fire country out in Southern California, is that I find most people are not prepared, other than the group of your preppers. Most normal, everyday, average, walking around people, and take the word normal out there. Most people,
we're good. We it's okay
because I love preppers. I love the fact that they're thinking about things and have a plan, whereas most people don't. And that's what motivated my film, is because these things happen year after year. It's the same story, different victims, and it's how can we do a better job? How can we be more prepared so this stops happening? And it's because we have to be proactive and not reactive. Most disaster rescues and all those things, we're great at reacting. We have some heroic people that swoop in and save people, and first responders that do a tremendous job. I'd like to see that have to happen less often. I'd like to see people in a house that they don't have to come pick through the rubble to find if you're in there. The house survived. And that's what motivated me to make this film, is to look at these disasters and say, okay, how could we have done things differently? How can we change that trajectory that keeps happening? And, the film hopefully has an impact, but it's tough. It's because you really have to change things from the bottom up, because if you're waiting for the government and the building codes and all those things, we're not going to be around anymore.
Absolutely. For whatever, being Canadian, I've been kind of enthralled in the civil defense movement of the 50s and 60s. And that was very much, it was government encouraging ground up preparation. And I understand the need for FEMA today because, in order to do things on a large scale, you really need kind of a corporate intervention. I understand that. But where do you see the bottom down or the personal preparation starts? Is that with dealing with these sort of things?
I think if every individual was more aware of what their situation was, that's the way it's going to start. What happens is, like here in the United States, the real estate market is really competitive. Sure. So if I go out and look at a house and I see all these bells and whistles and eye candy and I think it's really nice, I may end up buying that house and it's a piece of garbage because I wasn't looking at the right things. And so at the end of The Last House Standing, where the radio host says, you're responsible for covering your own ass, that's the reality. It is, if we are waiting for someone to look out for us, we're in big trouble, because there are places that change building codes, and we see dramatic differences. We showed that in Moore, Oklahoma in the film. You see it in parts of Alabama where they're building resilient homes. And so they're building houses that can survive better in a tornado, in a hurricane, in a fire. We have the technology, but a lot of builders out there are just building to code, or not even to code in some instances. And so I tell people that if a builder ever says I'm building to code, I'd find another builder. I want a builder that's thinking ahead and saying I'm going beyond that. And I speak with that from the experience of, I feel like such a moron for the homes that I've bought and the mistakes that I've made. So now I'm putting the brakes on. The last mistakes I made was moving when I moved here and bought the house we have now. Going forward, I'm going to be doing my homework if I ever move again. There's so many things I now know to ask for and check on and look into that I never would have thought of before. And I'm not going to settle and let somebody just dump their crap on me.
I like that. I want to slide back real quick before we dive in a little more. There's something else I meant to ask you. So obviously this has been a passion project, The Last House Standing. Was there a single inciting event that got you passionate about this, or was it like accumulation of a bunch of things over the years?
I would say there's been an accumulation. When I was in Seattle, we used to cover stories when the rivers would flood, when the snow was melting, and people would lose everything in their house from flooding. When I lived in Detroit, it was the same story, and it would happen year after year, where the water would rise. And then we had a sump pump in our house in Detroit, and we just had a couple feet of water, and it ruined everything in the basement. So that was a personal experience with it. But probably the most dramatic thing was that when I was working in San Antonio, Texas, there was a tornado in Moore, Oklahoma, and they flew me up there to cover it. And I interviewed this woman that the only thing left where her house was the bathtub and a mattress that she held over her that kept her from getting sucked out and killed in the tornado. Everything else was gone. It looked like they had just poured a slab and there was nothing else there. And that stuck with me. It's like, wow, she probably had no idea it could go that badly. Fortunately, she had the good sense to do what she did to protect herself. But everything else was gone in that house. And then there was a church that had a 2x4 that was driven into the cement or the block on the outside of the church. And I try to explain that to people. Do you know, just take a piece of wood and run towards a wall and throw it.
Right.
Do you know how fast the wind had to go to cleanly put that 2x4 inside that structure? It scares the hell out of you if you think about it.
It gives me literal chills. I'm not kidding. Because I mean, we get tornadoes, we get plow winds up here, where I was out one day putting vinyl siding on the house. I went across town, 5 minutes later, come back. My styrofoam was everywhere. That's about the worst we get. A few limbs down, so I can't imagine. Have you experienced any tornadoes up close or
I have not.
Okay.
I'm not brave enough to be a storm chaser. My boss in Texas used to want me to go towards the hurricanes, like a lot of these fools do when there's a hurricane. And I said, look, if the storm's coming from the southwest, I'm going to the northeast. It's like, isn't the idea for us to show people how to be safe, not stupid? And so I'm not a storm chaser. Those guys are crazy. Those men and women that do that, man, you really have to know what you're doing, because you're risking your life out there. And I'm not that brave or crazy to do that. But I have been out in snowstorms and blizzards. I've been in earthquakes. When I was working in Seattle, they sent me up on the roof, which was below the Space Needle, and there were 100-mile-an-hour winds up there, and I was doing live shots from the roof of this building. So, sometimes you have to do it, but tornadoes and hurricanes, not my thing if I can avoid it.
I get you. Well, what do they say? That the best fight you win is the fight you're not in, right?
Exactly.
So what are let's start with, because what I liked about your documentary was there was some kind of practical things where, if I remember correctly, they said if houses were built properly in tornado zones, they could be made to hold up to, is it an F3 or an E3? I can't remember what
I think it's an EF3. And here's what the difference is. And Roy Wright said this in the film. If you're in the bullseye of an EF5 tornado,
right,
there's probably nothing that could be done. And at that point, if you're the bullseye, you want to have that storm cellar in your house and protect your life, because at that point, that's what you have to do. But they found that, 100 yards, 200 yards, a quarter mile to each side of the tornado, houses were still getting badly damaged, but they didn't have to. If they shored up the garage so the door didn't blow open, if they bracketed the roof to the walls, if the whole house was tightened up in a way that made it safer, those houses wouldn't get damaged as badly. And those are the ones that you need to save. Because if I'm watching the tornado, half a mile down the road, and my house all of a sudden, boom, blows up from the tornado, that doesn't have to happen. And what amazed me when we were in Moore, Oklahoma, there's only a small percentage of people even have storm cellars, and they had 8 tornadoes hit them. And you can finance those. You can get a low interest loan to do that. I can't imagine living in a place like that and not having that. Why would you not? That seems like it comes with it. You should definitely do that. Yet a lot of people don't. And I find that curious, because when you see the damage, and you heard the gentleman that I interviewed who, his house was badly damaged when he was a kid, and that stuck with him for the rest of his life. It's frightening to hear the stories of these people. The gentleman who was the police officer, who's now a councilman, who saw all that damage, and you see all the stuff flying in the air, and people are just getting wiped out. It's terrifying. And I don't know. I've met people in Oklahoma that have never seen tornadoes. I thought when you walked out your front door every morning, you were dodging them. It's like, ooh, twister. But I can't imagine not doing everything to be safe. If you're going to live there, and a lot of people do, why wouldn't you have a storm cellar?
It kind of struck me. There was a gentleman in your documentary that said, how did they put it? That being directly affected by a tornado was rare enough that they didn't see the need to have it in the building code, I believe. Was that right?
Yeah, the percentage. If you do it on percentages.
Sure, which I get.
Percentages are very low of any one individual structure getting hit. But when you look at Moore, Oklahoma, where they had, I think it was 4 major tornadoes and 8 altogether that did major damage in the town, I think you throw statistics out the window.
Absolutely.
And, you see that with different places. What was it? A couple of years ago, parts of Louisiana got hit by 3 hurricanes in a row. It was boom, 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 just got hit, storm after storm. They say lightning never strikes the same place twice. I don't, statistically, maybe that's true. But so maybe it hits me this time, and then it hits you, and maybe I'm going to get killed by the one that hits you. It's like, I don't, statistics don't make me feel any safer.
Right. I mean, outliers create statistics, right? So you have a chance of being an outlier, somebody who gets struck twice by lightning. And so, I mean, around here, we definitely prepare with the things that are most likely to happen to you. And so if you live in a place like Moore, I think it would be prudent to have, do you know what one of those underground shelters go for by chance?
I think they said it start at $3,000 and then they go up from there. So, a lot of people who don't have that. Now I understand people have to make financial decisions,
sure.
But if you told me, okay, for $3,000, we're going to put this in a 30-year mortgage and we're going to give you a 2% interest. I mean, that's practically nothing that you're paying for that peace of mind. But believe it or not, there's people that cancel their homeowner's insurance because they haven't had anything go wrong. They haven't had to make claims. In Malibu, some people took insurance off of collector cars and different things because they didn't think that they were going to have a fire. Sure. And you can't look at insurance at the end of the year and go, I didn't need that. It's like health insurance. I was healthy last year. Well, God bless you. Maybe next year you're going to get cancer and you need that insurance. You can't look back at it as an expense you shouldn't have made. You have to go, whoa, thank goodness I didn't need that, but I was glad I had it.
Absolutely. I'm a big fan of AAA, having roadside assistance as well. Some people are like, oh, you should know how to change a tire yourself. Well, sure. But, if I can get something for $15 a month that guarantees I'm going to have a much better day if I'm traveling on the interstate, I'm probably going to grab it, Absolutely.
When I got a new car a year ago, and when I was driving across the Courtney Campbell Bridge, it's a bridge from Clearwater to Tampa, and I got a flat tire on a bridge.
Oh.
And I always look at those cars that break down on the bridge, and I think, what a moron. Did they run out of gas? Why didn't they know their car had a problem before then? And there I was, that moron, sitting on the side of the road. And I was glad I had coverage with the car to get it towed off the bridge, or it might still be there.
Well,
So I believe in having warranties and coverage for as many things as you possibly can, because the one time I slip up is when I needed it.
Absolutely. I just wanted to throw this up here. This is Lee from Texas, Cold War prepper. And he said the Jarrell tornado about 5 miles north of here in May 97 tore the asphalt off the roadway. That's incredible.
Oh, yeah. I mean, when you can see it drive a 2x4 into a concrete building, all bets are off what it can do. And when you see an entire slab obliterated of a house and everything's gone, I mean, it's hard to wrap your head around that. But we've seen so many images this year of tragic places where tornadoes have hit and people were killed. And it's just heartbreaking. It's really scary. And there's a lot of places in this country that it can happen. And I'm just surprised people aren't more prepared.
So that's a good lead in. Where do people start? What are some of the things? Because it's kind of cool. I've seen some neat movements over the last few years. One of them is what do they call it? Whole life movement, where when they build a house, they put plywood behind the walls in the bathroom so that when you get older, you can put a grab bar there, or reinforcement for trolleys to get up the stairs. What are some things that people can do when they're building the house, or things to look for when they're buying a house that might make their life a little better in a natural disaster?
Well, it's interesting because you have to have access to ask those questions, and you have to know who you're asking the questions to. And I can look back at every house that I've bought and I go, okay, who was I talking to? What were they telling me? And so one of the things I think is most important is to try to get access to the actual builder.
Okay.
And ask them questions. And if you can't do that, I think it should be a concern for you. And I have a few of them written down. It's like, can you tell me all the natural disasters and dangers that you took into consideration when you were building this house? So you directly ask them, have you thought about these things and what did you do? Then you would say, exactly how is this house built to withstand hazards? So for example, if you're telling me it can survive 140 mile an hour wind, tell me how it can survive 140 mile an hour wind. Don't just have me take your word for it, because I've seen houses where they've had storm windows, but they put them in backwards, or they had hurricane brackets and they put them in upside down. So it's only as good as the people actually doing the work. And, if there's one industry I'm not a fan of, and I'm honest about this in my films and in any conversation, it's the construction industry, because it's such a personal thing. And in my personal situations, I really think they don't give a shit. Now, overall, that's not a fair thing to say, because there's very talented and very good builders out there that do a great job. I'm just talking about in my world. I haven't had that experience yet, but I've met people that talk a good game and say they're really good. So I would keep asking them these questions. How much more would it cost to build a house that would actually withstand the disasters? You're telling me this can't. Well, what if I asked you to do it and make it better?
Right.
There's a problem with that. And I had a guy explain it to me on one of my podcasts. He goes, it's not efficient if a builder never builds it that way, and then you're asking them to do it and they don't know how. It's going to cost you a lot more money than it might if they actually knew how to do that.
That's a really good point, because if they have to learn on you, there's going to be a lot more labor involved, isn't there?
Yeah, there is. And they might not do it right, and they might have to find other people to do it. And so that's the risk of that. But it's still a question you want to know. How much more would it cost to build it to withstand that? Can you show us how a house made of concrete that has closed cell spray foam versus wood houses that might just have the old foam? They just put the padding in the walls. Ask them the difference, because if a builder can do it less expensively, they said this, the builder in Moore, Oklahoma that we interviewed, they changed the building code, and he said it's a good thing they did, because it only added the cost of what granite countertops would be to the cost of a house to make it safer. But he said most people would still choose not to do that if they had a choice. They would choose the granite countertops.
Did you run costs with anybody? I was just curious. I mean, I know this is going to be way higher in certain areas of the country, but did anybody talk about the percentage cost increase of building a home that would be resilient to the most common natural disasters?
I've heard it anywhere from 10 to 20%.
Okay.
But if you think about it, it depends on remember last year or 2 years ago during COVID, when the price of wood skyrocketed.
Right.
So then wood houses were becoming more expensive. But there's certain parts of the country that you can get away with building with wood, even though I believe concrete is better. But in Florida, I don't know why anybody would build a house with wood. And a lot of people here do concrete on the first floor and wood on the second floor. And
Really?
and it's mind-boggling to me. There's houses a couple blocks from me that are on the water that are probably selling between $5 and $8 million, and they're doing wood on the second floor. And I actually called the builder and I said, "Why are they doing that?" And he goes, "Because that's what the home buyer wanted. That's where they chose to. They wanted a design, to put concrete on both floors. It requires a certain kind of design. You have to have a supporting wall for the concrete because it's so heavy. And they wanted to have the look of the house more than they wanted the safety of the house. That's crazy.
I get it. I understand, but it doesn't make sense to me per se. But did the house that the gentleman built, kind of the main character of your documentary there,
mm-hmm.
did he mentioned how he wanted to build a house that would last generations? Did he? I didn't notice it in the documentary, but did he talk about how much more they spent on that compared to?
He did not. And
no.
It was a difficult question to ask him. He wasn't laying that out. But I imagine, to put your house 38 feet into the sand, with concrete pillars. But look what the difference was. It's like if you're going to put a house there, think through what your goal is. And not everybody can afford to build that way. Then maybe that's not where you should be living. Maybe you should be a half a mile inland and live there. And the problem in this country, I don't know how it is in Canada, is we don't tell people what they can do. They pretty much have freedom to make their own good or bad choices.
Sure.
But their bad choices cost society. Their bad choices cost a lot of people can't get insurance in Florida, and it's because of all the houses that were destroyed, not the ones that are still standing. So somebody else's bad choice or bad luck affects everybody. And if you're going to put a house on the beach and it's just okay, Rocket Mortgage, just okay, that's crazy because we're all paying for that. You may be taking the beating, but my insurance is going up because of your choice. And it's crazy.
I'm cool with somebody who wants to build a house without insurance if they're cool with that. I mean, if they want to cover their own liability, whatever, but I'm a big fan of personal responsibility. And I liked when you said, hey, if you can't afford to build here, maybe you should build inland a little bit. That's not a bad idea. Making kind of a geographical assessment of, where you can make your pocketbook stretch, right?
Well, one of the best examples, I interviewed a gentleman a few weeks ago who was in Naples, Florida, in an area where there were 20 houses in the community and they all flooded, and they had to rebuild all their houses because all the contents were destroyed with the water. They just rebuilt them to the same code that existed because the building code didn't change. And I asked him, well, did you do anything different? They did not, because they didn't have to. And what could they have done? If everybody in the neighborhood had to elevate their house 10 feet because the flood levels have changed, they might not have been able to afford to rebuild. That's kind of a major deal to do that. So their insurance for the association went up $100,000 for their flood insurance, which divided by 20 is $5,000 a resident. And that's for community flood insurance. But that happens a lot of places where there's a disaster. In Mexico Beach, they changed the building code, but they got wiped out by a Category 5 hurricane. They didn't change the building code to survive a Category 5 hurricane. They raised the wind rating from, I think, 130 miles an hour to 140. They raised the storm surge a little bit, but not 20 feet where some of the water was. So we make these choices. To me, if a disaster happens and you see what can happen there, maybe that's an indication we shouldn't be building there.
So I really appreciate that. Not many people like to say that, but there's some truth behind it. I appreciate it. Is there a movement at all from within the insurance industry to, because, kind of slide back a little, up here in Alberta, something that has become very common is covered car lots, because a lot of, we have huge hailstorms that come through here that just decimate thousands of vehicles. So they now require, if you want to have insurance, buy private insurance, you have to have a covered car lot. Is there any, is there anywhere where insurance is starting to either force people's hand to say, hey, if you want to build here and you want to be insured, you need to raise it or cement or whatever?
Well, they do change the flood level. Like in the neighborhood that I live in, there are houses that are at sea level.
Okay.
And then they raised it to 9 feet. So I think when our house was built to get the cheaper flood insurance, houses had to be 9 feet above sea level. Well, since we've lived here, now they've raised it to 10. So they keep moving the goalpost, which is a good thing. I like to think they're on top of it. But everybody along the way isn't able to keep up with that. You're not going to jack your house up 2 feet just because of the flood level. So it's hard to keep up with that as we evolve into knowing more. Insurance in Florida is tougher to get because of all the damage. And like I said, it's all the people that had houses that got damaged that kind of are leading that charge, because everybody's house is fine, didn't need that, but we all have to pay for it. So the game keeps changing. The insurance industry, it's interesting that you brought that up. I feel about them kind of the way I feel about builders. You know, it's one of those industries where their goal is not to pay you.
Sure. Oh, I get it. Yep.
And if they can find a reason that you did something wrong, you're not getting that check. The mayor of Malibu in the fire, he didn't have a mortgage. The insurance company knew that, so they just said, we're not paying your claim. We don't have to pay you. Because if they had to fight Bank of America, it's a different game. Somebody's going to fight back. Wow. But if you're fighting a little resident, you know, that's the American dream. Pay off your mortgage, live mortgage free. I don't know if that's always such a good idea, because you want somebody on your side without you having to get an attorney and spend $1 million to fight them. At least it's a fair fight. But, you know, insurance companies, to me, if you've ever been to Las Vegas or if you have gambling there, you can get chips anywhere, but there's only a few places you can cash them in. And that's how I feel about the insurance industry. You got to find that one window in the back behind something, and that's where they'll pay your claim, because they'll look for 100 reasons not to. And I understand it's a business, but for people who are just wiped out by a disaster and they have the flood insurance fighting the homeowner's insurance to see who has to pay you, or they're telling you didn't document everything properly, or you didn't cross this T or dot that I, it's hard on victims to have to deal with that. And so I just hear too many stories about, you know, we see commercials where Jake from State Farm looks like a great guy, but the guy that comes out after a disaster is not going to be playing with your kids. And I mean, sure, there's good guys, but, you know, overall, I've heard a lot more horror stories than good stories.
So it's interesting you talked about the victim, because there was something else I learned in your documentary I had never heard of before, and it was assignment of benefit contracts.
Oh, yeah.
Can you, everybody needs to hear about these, because I didn't know they were a thing, and I still don't completely get them. So if you can fill me in, I'd like that.
This is insane. So my house gets wiped out. You come rolling into town as a contractor, and you say, yeah, I can fix that for you, but you have to assign your insurance benefits over to me, and the insurance company pays me to do the work. Now, in Panama City, Florida, there were a lot of criminals that rolled into town and ripped off a lot of people by having the insurance benefits assigned to them, and they took their time and in many cases never did the work. So I have $100,000 coming from my insurance company. It's signed over to Joe, the contractor, who's going to do all this work. And Joe's off fishing somewhere or doing something else. Maybe he's in jail, but I don't get my money.
Right.
In one case, they actually was in jail. A guy that we had met there is now in jail. And so people that were victims are now getting that double whammy where they're victimized again by criminals. And I look at that as, if you've ever been out on a warm summer night and you turn a light on in a field and you see all the bugs and things that come out and drawn to the light, that's what happens after a disaster. There's a nucleus of people that after the first wave of heroes save people, then you have to deal with all the unscrupulous dirtbags that come in to profit off of your misery.
So how does that, our town has a lot of really old water infrastructure. So I've done quite a good business over the years fixing up, rehabilitating people's front lawns after their water mains have been dug up. Now, the insurance company will require a quote from me. And in order for me to get paid, the homeowner has to sign off on that check, as well as I need to sign off on that check. So how does this differ? So do people just say the only way to guarantee that I'll do your work is you sign your insurance benefits over, or what am I
Yeah,
missing?
in the cases where we interviewed people, absolutely. So they then have, and if it's a joint thing, you still need that second signature. So if it's you and I having to sign, and it was a way to just take over people's insurance money and rip them off. And I really think there has to be stronger regulation about that. But people are desperate. So if my house is unlivable and I have 3 kids and a wife, and oh God, I got to get this fixed. And some guy says, I can take care of that for you, but this is how I work. This is how we have to do it. And then he screws you over. That's just horrible. So people really have to be aware in that situation. Try to control that yourself.
Sure.
If that person won't let you pay them, don't use them.
Fair.
I mean, I know it's hard to turn that down. It's like if your roof is leaking and a guy comes through with a tarp, some of those people were charging $10,000 to throw a tarp on people's roof. And yeah, if water's pouring in your house, maybe that's a bargain, but you could do that for $50, $100. Go down to Home Depot and do it yourself if you had the wherewithal and
if
it
you
wasn't
were prepared.
Yeah, but I'm probably the guy that might have to sit there and go, I got to pay this because I got to protect my family, because I would probably not have been prepared for something like that. I mean, most people are not. So I'm not criticizing the victims. I'm just saying it's so sad that it happens so many times, and when you hear about it, it's just heartbreaking.
K-Bonk wants to know what's the documentary and where can they find it? I'll throw that out now. We'll get a plug in now too.
Fantastic. It's called The Last House Standing, and it's available in 2 places. You can get it for free on Tubi TV, Tubi TV, and most new TVs and channels, cables have Tubi TV. You got to sit through commercials. If you go to my website, thelasthousestanding.org, you can rent the film for $3.99. Now, I'm not going to tell you to do one over the other, because I'll be honest with you. If you said I don't want to pay you $3.99, I want you to see the film. So go watch it on Tubi. They'll send me a nickel 6 months from now, and I'm okay with that, because I think it's important that you see the film. If you want to help out, maybe get my kids a school lunch tomorrow, $3.99 on thelasthousestanding.org. And we also have some cool swag on there, like this Last House Standing mug, which has the house from The Last House Standing, where I called the owner of the house and I said, do you mind if I put it on some swag for the website? And he goes, yeah, go for it. Just, send me some stuff. And so I sent him some stuff, and he's great.
So that house, that was really, it's pretty powerful footage, because you kind of zoom in. I'm guessing years ago it would have been done with a helicopter. Now it's probably done with a drone, I'm thinking. But
we had a drone.
You come in and there's just that house and there's desolation all around. So what did he do different that kept that house being the last house standing?
It's the way he had it anchored into the sand, first of all, because a lot of houses wash away. Water in a storm surge can wipe out almost anything. I mean, Imagine the water pounding in from the sea, and it can do an incredible amount of damage. And then it was a concrete walls with the rebar and concrete on the different areas around the house that made it secure. They still had some damage where other houses hit theirs as they were washing away, but they did enough. They had a breakaway staircase, so for a while they had to use a ladder to get in, because the staircase did what it was supposed to. It washed away, so it didn't pull the house with it. But they had a plan, and it worked. They put thought into it and did the way the brackets were on the roof. There was one area on the roof where they had a plug for a ceiling fan. A little gap was there, and it tore off a piece of the ceiling, because Mother Nature finds your weakest link in those situations, and it did with those guys. But everything else was so solid that the house survived. Now, I've talked to people that said, well, I wouldn't, if all my neighbors were wiped out, I don't know that I'd want to be there. Well, I'd rather be the guy that was there than the guy that's not. If you read The 3 Little Pigs, and I've read it 1,000 times, I want the brick house. I'm sorry. Call me a greedy pig. That pig had it figured out. The other two, where did they go running? Over to his house.
That's true. That's a good point.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. Yeah, because it's fairly impressive. I mean, you see those cement pillars or pylons or whatever that he has driven down into the sand, and it's impressive. I mean, was it 10 feet off the ground, or was it a little more than that?
I think it was higher than 10 feet. I think it was 15 or 16 feet. I don't know for sure, but it was high enough off that the water went under the house, and it did not wash it away. You've seen other houses, and there's videos of houses that, like in places in Texas or in Louisiana, it looks like they're on stilts, like those guys that are on the stilts that walk around at the circus, and it just blows over. And that's how you could put yourself in that situation where that could happen. These guys built it in a way that it was tested and it survived.
That's impressive.
Yeah.
I got a couple of questions here I started that will. One step closer asks, does George have a checklist of things to ask a home builder?
Yes, it's on the lasthousestanding.org, and it's questions you should ask your builder. And I just put together a little PDF there that I think you should ask. And, I went on with who verified that your house would hold up if a disaster hits. You're not just telling me. Somebody come out and check. You have an inspector that comes out that says, yeah, the brackets were put in properly, the walls were poured in place properly, all these things. Who verifies it? Can you prove that? Do you have documents to show me that you actually did this? Do you think it's okay to build just to code?
Right.
And if a builder says that, man, that would make me nervous. That's yeah, because the code changes all the time. I want a guy that's thinking 5, 10 years, 20 years down the road that his work will still be there. And then what products do you use that make your house that you're building more resilient? Can they tell you that? And you think these guys and gals are pretty sharp, and a lot of them are. They should be able to have those answers. A lot of times we're intimidated from asking those questions because we think, oh, I'm going to be a pain. They're not going to like me. It's not going to go well. They'll sell to somebody else. Well, you've just done yourself a favor. If that weeds you out, then you should say, thank God, man, I just got dealt a good hand here, where if they can't answer these questions, why am I spending all this money on their product? And I'd like to see us get to the point in this country where Zillow and Redfin and Realtor.com start rewarding houses that are built safe as opposed to ones that just look nice, because I don't think we give anywhere enough attention to those features or reward them. And I like I say, it would be great if the people on top made those choices for us and said, you have to build these houses safer. But look at this country right now. If I say the sky's blue, somebody else is going to tell me it's brown or green. We can't agree on anything. So how are we going to change that?
Are there any? So I do a ton of YouTube testing reviews, and I'm a big fan of third-party verification. So, when flashlight companies send their stuff away to get it, checked out, or surge protectors send it away to see, if it meets specifications. Are there any companies offering kind of verification for disaster sturdiness?
There's a group called Fortified in this country, and then there are other ones you can Google, but they do a really good job of having a standard of what they think people should be building to. And people should do their homework in their area. A lot of times when we hire a home inspector, first of all, sometimes the realtor gives you a list and they'll point out they don't like this guy number 3 on the list because they say he's too picky. The builder doesn't even want him on the property. That's the guy I'm hiring.
Right.
I want the guy the builder hates, because hopefully they're coming out looking for stuff. But those guys are really just testing. Does the plug work? Does the water? They're not opening up the walls. You can't get behind the drywall to see how the roof was done. If you're building a house, walk through the process and make sure you get inspections along the way. So before they seal up the walls, you get to see what's inside. Go out there with a camera and get pictures. I had one builder I was working with years ago, didn't even want us on the job site because he thought it was such a pain in the ass. And he didn't want us there. He goes, I don't need you looking over my shoulder. Everything we didn't look over his shoulder for ended up being a problem because the guy it was horrible. And that's the thing, is that relationship has to be a give and take. We're spending a lot of money. If they truly are doing what they say, transparency should not be a problem. Right. They should be glad to help you see those things and show them. But they've been conditioned to the point of, let's just make the most money possible. It's a business. And when the house gets destroyed in a few years, we'll just build it again. I mean, that's not good enough for me. I hate that.
Did you say it was Fortify or Fortified?
Fortified.
Okay.
Fortified. Google that while we're talking. They're an organization here in the United States, and I think I have a link to them on the lasthousestanding.org too. So there's resources on there that we have that you can use to find out how safe your neighborhood is, different standards for building. And you just really want to ask a lot of questions. Don't be afraid to be the guy or gal that is asking 100 questions. If they're too busy for you, they're making it easy for you.
I put the fortifyhome.org. Fortifiedhome.org. A family deserves a strong home. Does that sound right?
Yeah.
Yeah. They got an impressive looking website there. So I just shared the link, everybody, in case you want to check it out, because I'm a big fan of, anytime you can look for a standard and find a home that comes up to that standard. I think that's really important.
Absolutely, it's important. I'm just checking on here myself, just to
Sure.
On the resource page. There's also buildingresilient.com, smarthomeamerica.org. So if people go to thelasthousestanding.org, I have several pages of lists on there. But Fortified is definitely one. There's the Resilience Action Fund. There's a lot of resources that can direct you towards getting more information. And there's a whole other area. I'll bring this up just because it's something that I realized when we bought our house here in Tampa. Is you move to a new neighborhood and
Sure.
You're buying a house. Don't just know about your builder. Know what the plan is for the neighborhood, because a realtor is not going to necessarily tell you. We found our house here and it was a tree-lined street. It looked like it could be, anywhere in the country with all these beautiful trees lining the street, shade. Figured it'd be great in the summer. When we actually moved here, all the trees had been cut down. And they were doing a major sewer project where they were changing the storm drain down the middle of the street. So they had to cut out all these trees. Nobody told us about that. Our realtor didn't tell us about it. The builder's realtor didn't tell us about it. Now, I'm not one of those, I'm going to blame everybody. I should have done my research and found out what was in the queue. Mm-hmm. And here's why you have to care about something like that. When a city where you live does a project, it's usually the low bid wins for who's coming in and doing that project. So now they're coming down the street, tearing up your yard, tearing up your driveway. They don't give a crap about you. And the amount of time it takes you to get your house back to where it was because of the inefficiencies of them took us over a year. Just, they said, we took pictures of everything. We know how to put stuff back. They put our mailbox back on the wrong side of the driveway. And it's like, that kind of blows that out the window. Really, where were those pictures? You should have known at least where to put the mailbox back. We had pavers. They put the wrong color. They put the wrong style. They did everything you could do wrong. The wrong grass, they didn't do the curb. I mean, everything you could screw up. The people that they hired, because they weren't the best and the brightest, didn't do a great job. And so you have to really know what's in store for your neighborhood. Don't just assume because it's beautiful when you're buying that a year from now, they're not going to be tearing down everything there for some kind of infrastructure project. So it's just,
I've never heard. I like that. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there. That's really good. That's a tip that I don't think I've ever heard anybody in the preparedness sphere talk about before. That's really proactive.
Well, I wanted to start this business called Needle in a Haystack, and I was going to be the guy that finds the needle, because I always seem to. You go someplace and someone goes, wow, that's never happened before. Wow, I've never seen that before. I had a car with a rattle. I had bought a Mercedes SUV, and when they took it off the truck and delivered it to my house, there was this rattle, and it would just never go away. And I kept going into the Mercedes, and they would go, we've never heard that before. I go, okay, great, but you hear it now. What are you going to do about it? They ended up giving me a new car because of it. But the point is, I have those things happen. So when I buy a house, if they say, it's never going to happen there, it's probably going to happen. So that's a great lesson to know what is the plan for that neighborhood. Look around. In Tampa, there's a lot of older houses. Now, 3 of the houses right around us have been torn down and been rebuilt. That's good for the neighborhood. But do you know how unsettling it is when a house that's been there for 70 years gets torn up? Where do all the rats and snakes and critters from that house go? Well, they're not staying there. They're going to the houses next door. They're now released into the neighborhood. So you have to think about all this stuff, and nobody's going to tell you if you don't find out yourself.
Man, that's good. I like that. One Step Closer asked, I wonder if you can get a discount on your insurance for a better built home. Do you know anything about that?
Yes. If you go to, when you talk to your insurance company, they ask you for all the features. And if you can show you have hurricane strength windows, or if you live in a fire zone and you have the eaves are closed, so the embers can't get in there. If you had a fire retardant roof, all the things you do generally can come back to give you some kind of discount. You just have to make sure the insurance company knows about it. And sometimes they'll send an inspector out to check, because those things, even if they don't give you a discount, it's still worth it because it's going to save you and your family. But you can save money for a lot of those things. Absolutely.
There was another gentleman in your documentary that I didn't catch his name. I got to go back and find it. But he was the guy that installed, I think it seemed like he did fire prevention installations. It was a ranch in California that they created some sort of humidity system?
Bobby Milstein with SoCal Fire.
Okay.
It was this the name of the ranch is escaping me, of course, because it's past my bedtime. But he put in this system that when fire started, they had all these pumps around the area that pumped water out of the lakes and shot it into the air, because when a fire happens, it's usually very dry and everything's really dry. So his goal is to raise the humidity in that zone so things don't burn as easily. And he saved that entire ranch from burning down by having his system. He had a plan and it worked. And he also has these foam systems that people can spray their houses with if a fire is coming. So there's a lot of things you can do. Most people just don't want to think that it's going to happen to them. And so as a result, they don't make those kind of preparations. But this ranch did, and he saved it. He's a genius at what he does.
Was it, I saw something, it was just a quick shot in there. It almost looked like a fire retardant gel or something that they were spraying. Was that his system as well? Or?
Yeah, yes. And you can spray down the house with it. So there's inexpensive ways and there's expensive ways. You know, the way they protected the ranch was the expensive way, with pumps and hoses and things that would spray it, because they had a huge investment in that property. For a house, you can get he said for $400 or $500, you can get a spray system that you could foam your roof and your house with, that could make the difference between losing it and not losing it. And so he just says nobody wakes up the day of a fire and comes up with their plan. The planning happens way beforehand on a sunny day when most people would rather just go skiing or go to the beach or do anything but preparation. Preparation's not exciting. I'm telling preppers, preparation's not exciting for anybody but you, and you guys are great at it. But we're not, and we need to be better, because we're the ones that get caught every year in the disasters.
There's a really good line, and I used it for the title of tonight's show, is hope is not a strategy. Yeah. What does that mean to you?
If you're hoping it's not going to happen and that's your plan, you're in big trouble, because that works on a sunny day, and all of a sudden the storm's rolling in. You know, when Hurricane Ian was barreling towards Tampa, we hoped it like hell it didn't hit us. If it had, the damage you saw down in Sanibel Island and Naples and Fort Myers would have been 1,000 times worse here, because that was our doomsday scenario storm. They always say if it comes up from the Gulf on an angle coming from the southwest, it's going to push all that water. There would be 20 feet of water in downtown Tampa. Pinellas County would be flooded. They predicted 50% of the buildings would be uninhabitable, of office buildings. 2 million people would have been injured. It would have been staggering. And it was just luck that the storm turned. Now, the weathermen all had these ashen looks on their faces for days, just going, you got to be prepared, you got to be ready. And then when the storm turned, everyone here goes, phew, I knew it. We never get hit by those. There's always some feature that pushes it south and makes it turn. So we got lucky. So hope in that case, maybe that was the winning strategy, but it would not have been if that storm had hit. And it made me rethink evacuations. Was I stupid to stay here riding it out with my family? What life would have been like if everything in this neighborhood was destroyed? It was eye-opening for me because of what I do, but I don't sense that anybody around me feels the same way. I think they're just, you know, you see this in Louisiana and New Orleans. People are partying on Bourbon Street when the storm blows by because they don't think anything's going to happen. Hope is their strategy. And once that turns, there's some military saying, there's no atheists in foxholes.
Right.
It's like once it goes bad, it's too late. And you make your choices. The gentleman I interviewed from Naples, his next door neighbor died in Ian. She stayed in the house. She didn't evacuate. And it was an older woman who thought she could ride out the storm, and she was killed. And that happens way too often because people just make that choice that they're ready. So hope is not a strategy. You need an actual plan.
Everybody, most of the people that you interviewed, the elderly gentleman in his 90s, his house was washed away. The lady that all she had left was her Italian pizza oven. They were full of regret. And you had some really good kind of practical tips about saving the shit that matters to you. What would be a plan that you would kind of talk about, or something you could, we call it a bug out plan, but whatever you want to call it, like a get out of Dodge, or what's some kind of practical tips that you usually recommend to people?
Well, the woman in the film, Mrs. Carradine, had a great tip. And that's you keep a box in a closet with a list of the things you would want to grab at the last minute. Because if you came to most people and you said, you got to be out of here in 10 minutes, most people would spend 9 figuring out what they wanted to do in that 10 minutes. And then they have a minute left, then they leave with nothing. If you have a list, grab insurance papers, grab pictures of the children, grab grandma's blanket, and you throw all those things in the box. You've already thought about that when you're not panicking. Most people, there's a reason you want to go to the gun range. There's a reason you want to learn self-defense. You don't learn it when you're getting attacked. You learn it beforehand. And so if you make that list on a day where you're just sitting around with your family and you go, okay, let's think of the 10 things we got to get out of here if we had to run. And that's what you grab. And that's the kind of preparation that they could have saved a lot of things. All her jewelry melted. And the only thing that survived was the pizza oven. And she said, I wish I had put my jewelry in the pizza oven, because they lost everything. And some people go, wow, they have money, they'll rebuild. There's nothing that gets back your family heirlooms and the things that your parents gave you and your grandparents and things that you've been passed down in your family for years. Your Letterman's jacket from high school, your yearbooks. It's just, you don't get a second chance with that stuff. And so write it down. And she called it a go box, and have that ready. So if you got to go, you can grab that box.
It's funny. I've always thought about important documents, your passport, your birth certificate. But I guess maybe it's the man in me. I never thought about the keepsakes or the heirlooms as much. I need to shore that up with the missus, because there are things that you just couldn't. You can't bring it. The lady mentioned, I believe it was a sketch of her grandmother who is long gone. The guy who sketched it died in the First World War when she was 16 years old. And great, you could have a scan of it, but that doesn't cut it. You know what I mean?
Yep. And if you're not prepared, you have to get lucky. The gentleman that I interviewed from Naples had all his family photos in a cedar chest in his house that was flooded and completely damaged. A week before Ian hit, his son wanted that cedar chest and came down and got it. So he took all his pictures and he had them up on a shelf, which was above where the water came in.
Oh, sure.
So he was fortunate, but it wouldn't have happened that way if just fate hadn't played into, he got rid of this piece, so he had to move those things. When my basement flooded in Detroit, all my videotapes and kids' toys, where do you keep that stuff? In the basement, in boxes.
Right.
It's the worst place to keep it because it was all ruined, all flooded. So that's what happens. If you don't have a plan for it, inevitably it comes back to bite you, and it happens all the time.
People are enjoying you. K-Bonk said, great conversation, mind-bending. And One Step Closer said, this is a fantastic show. So you're bringing the heat tonight. I appreciate it. So thank you.
Well, I appreciate the nice words.
I'm gonna throw out a random question here for you, because you might get a kick out of this. But you're in Florida. You deal with disaster preparedness. One of my odd quirks is I love the Waffle House, and I've done an episode on the Waffle House and their preparedness. Did you ever, when you were in the weather end of things, did you ever look at the Waffle House preparedness index at all?
I did not, and okay. I love eating there. But a few years ago, I became one of those gluten-free people. So the Waffle House is now off my list of places that I eat. But I don't know that.
Okay, well, I it's not where I talk tonight, but I'm going to fill you in real quick. So Please. They have the most. they are the most disaster prepared company in North America. And they have a weather center that rivals the Weather Network and FEMA. So anyway, I did a whole show on it, and it's enthralling how prepared they are for it. They have different menu. Anyway, it's cool. So I'll
it sounds great.
maybe I'll send you a link to it sometime so you can.
Please, I would love to listen to that. That sounds awesome.
I dig that because I'd love to have the disaster, whoever's in charge of disaster preparedness for Waffle House. I'd love to get him on the show someday because it would be a really cool topic to talk about.
It would be, and I love it when places have that level of preparation. A lot of times you don't think about the outreach of a company or the things they can do. Years ago, I made a video for a bank in San Antonio that, if you've ever been to Seattle, they have the Pike Place Fish Market, and the guys that toss the fish, you see it before sporting events. But they have this thing called the fish philosophy, and they go around the country teaching that to businesses. And that is, when somebody walks in the front door of your business, that may be the only time they ever encounter somebody. So you have to treat them with a certain respect. You have to present a certain image, all the things you have to do. It's a philosophy. And so when you hear that about preparedness, I love hearing that. It's like that really matters to them, and they should be getting the word out more so people hear about it. I think I want to go eat there now. I think that's awesome.
They're building, they have some second story businesses now as well. Places on stilts, just simply for that exact reason. So it's kind of cool. Yeah. It's right here. Said Waffle House is the best. Use the Waffle House scale for directing disaster response. I think it was in about 2008, the director of FEMA talked about the Waffle House index, and depending on, because they almost never close, and depending on how many Waffle Houses are closed in the area, that's the severity of the disaster. It's interesting. It's cool. So yeah,
it sounds amazing. I want to definitely, that's great. I hope they come on your show.
So, okay. We talked about being prepared, kind of the preparation, kind of talked about how we can build ahead of time to kind of weather the storm. What about the after effects? What about, okay, shit, I didn't do what I should have, and now my home is totaled. What do people do? Where do you go from there? What are your kind of recommendations?
Once you get in that mixer after a disaster, things are kind of out of your control. That's why I always talk about people wanting to control their own destiny, control your story and your narrative, because you may now want to rebuild your house right away, but some communities make it very difficult. In California, after the wildfires, they wouldn't let people just come back and rebuild their house if they wanted to make it better. You had to follow the exact footprint of what was there. Well, that house might have been there for 60 years, and now you got to follow that footprint. So, what changes to stop you? People fighting with their insurance company over whether it's the flood insurance claim or the regular insurance. Who's going to pay the damages? Then you have to get people to do it. Then you have to get the city to approve your plans. You have to find a place to live. Is it anywhere near where you're working? There are so many things once you get in that victim turmoil after a disaster that you can no longer control. I had one gentleman tell me that you want to be one of the first people to turn your claim in if you can, because if they're going to get 1 million claims and they're going by the order that they've turned in, don't just say, I'm going to just chill for a few weeks and get my stuff together. You want to be first in line. If your flight's canceled, you don't go have a cup of coffee. You run to the ticket window and you go, hey, send me on another flight. Help me. And that's how you want to handle a disaster. Get in the queue quickly. I mean, with calm, you don't want to knock anybody over getting there, but don't wait. Don't delay. Get your plan and start doing it. But my point is, try never to get to that point, because every victim sees their life take a turn, and it could last 5 years, 10 years. And some people never recover from that because they've lost everything. And they might not have a job. They might not have a school for their kids. There's so many things that fan out. We always see the Weather Channel is camped out by the beach, but 5 miles inland, an entire area is wiped out. And we don't hear about that. And the lodge, the beautiful lodge on the beach that got damaged. Well, what about all the people that worked there? What about the people the staff? Those people have homes too. Now, some of them are driving 40, 50 miles to get to work. So, or they don't have work at all. So you want to try to avoid that at all costs, because once you get in that, you have no control of your destiny.
That's really good. And it's true. Okay. So really the best way to react is to be prepared ahead of time and hopefully never have to deal with it. Hey?
Right. But if you do have to, okay, what are the things you can do right away?
Yes.
Actually understand your insurance policy. Most
Oh,
people haven't read it.
what do you
When,
mean?
when we talked to the radio personality in Panama City,
Yeah.
Kramer, he was talking about how people day after day were calling in the show and saying they had never read their insurance policy. They just knew they had homeowners insurance, but they didn't know all the nuances that could actually make that insurance help them if they needed it. And that's really the most important thing. You ever see the Seinfeld episode where he goes down to get his rent-a-car and they go, he had the reservation, but we don't have a car. And he goes, well, anybody can take a reservation. Having the car is really the most important thing. Anybody can have insurance. It's
Right.
getting the insurance paid that's the most important part of that transaction for us. I'm giving you my money for years. Now I need it back. What do I have to do to get it? Well, first thing, I should understand the policy. And that means I'm not smart enough to understand all that. There's a reason the writing is really small and there's 40 pages of bullshit that's on there that most people are never going to read. And if you don't like something in there, you can't negotiate it with them because it's their policy. So ask your agent who sold you that policy. Hey, Bob, explain this to me. Explain to me what I'm covered for. Category 1, Category 2, Category 5. What about flood? What about this? What about that? Understand it. And then have a copy. Have all your stuff documented so you can show them. You know how many people say, yeah, I had a big screen TV that probably never had a big screen TV? Have a picture of the big screen TV. It's a lot easier to replace that. Document everything.
I had a crackhead run off with my generator many years ago, and I was very sad. And I talked to a cop, and he was like, "Did you write down the serial number?" Nope, I didn't. So you know what I mean, right? So I do a walkthrough every couple of years, a video of everything, because we have a couple businesses we run, and it would just be easier, you know. I think anyway.
Yeah, and I think you're a lot better off hoping the insurance pays it than the police find it. Because at that point, like my production house in San Antonio was broken into twice, and they stole all our cameras, all our equipment. And when I told the police about it, they came out and filled out a report, but they're not going to find that stuff ever again. And another company that was robbed saw their stuff on Craigslist in Houston, and they called the police, and they go, "I'd just go buy it back if I was you." Really? How about going and arresting them? So. The insurance, I think, is our first line of defense. That's the one thing that can get us back, other than the memorabilia and things that you cannot replace. I would rather have that and at least get something than get nothing.
Arizona Renaissance Man wants to know, can you get flood and homeowners insurance from the same company so they don't argue over the coverage?
Because it's through the government. So I may have insurance through USAA, but it's a flood insurance company through FEMA that, it's I don't even understand how it works, but it's a separate policy, and they're two different things. Maybe it's possible to get them if you're with a company that also writes flood. I have not heard about that, but I can't tell you it doesn't exist. I just don't know about it personally.
Okay. And are there areas, so of course, me living way up north, I'm not completely up on it, but are there areas that you just can't get flood insurance because it's that bad?
There's areas where, so if my neighbor's house is at sea level and mine is at 9 feet or 10 feet, my flood insurance may be $1,000. His may be $5,000. His may be $10,000. It's less affordable because he's a much higher risk. And that's how, in insurance, everything is calculated by risks.
Sure.
So there's some places that you can't get it. Now, if you live in an area that almost never floods, you can get flood insurance for next to nothing. And I heard this from Tom Little at floodproofing.com, who was in our film. And he said that people from Hurricane Harvey in Houston, all those poor folks who the dam flooded and their houses were ruined, they could have got flood insurance for $300 or $400 to have a flood insurance policy that could have covered their house and gotten all the damage recovery for them. But they didn't do it because they weren't in a flood zone. If you're not in a flood zone, flood insurance is very inexpensive, and I would recommend having it.
I grew up on the East Coast in Nova Scotia. I now live on the prairies. On the East Coast, you could get rock chip. Sorry about that. You could get rock chip insurance for your windshield for almost nothing, to the point where quite often the insurance companies would fix a rock chip for you for no charge, so that you didn't claim on your windshield. When I moved to Alberta, I asked about rock chip insurance, and they laughed at me because it would have been so prohibitively expensive, because we have gravel roads every mile here, and I go through a windshield a year. So again, it's that whole thing, right? One place it's less likely, but less cost effective or less costly, whereas the other way it isn't.
But you still want to look into it. And so the people in Houston, they didn't think they were anywhere near something that flooded. When I lived in San Antonio, we had a huge rainstorm one year, and people that lived 5 miles away from a river got flooded because water can back up and do weird things depending on construction projects. As new houses go in, it gets diverted differently when it's running off. So all kinds of things can happen. So if for $300 you could add flood insurance to your portfolio and know that that could make the difference between being whole or not whole, that could be the best $300 you ever spend. And don't look at it after 2 or 3 years and go, God, I could have saved $900 if I hadn't done that. Because then the next year you're going to go, I wish I had had that, and you can't get it back.
Chris Dixon, this gentleman here, he's from Alberta, good buddy of mine, a little further south from me. He says, when we first moved here, they told us we couldn't get flood insurance because it was silly to have it. Doesn't flood here. 4 years later, half our town flooded.
Yeah, and you know what? It comes out of nowhere. That stream that's 2 miles away, they put in some house there or some building, and the water's now sent somewhere. I mean, you don't know. You can't possibly know everywhere that could come from in a disaster. So if it's not that expensive, cover your ass and get it.
Absolutely. One Step Closer says, always check FEMA flood maps before buying a home. Are you familiar with any of the kind of stuff that FEMA offers?
Yeah, and FEMA gets a bad rap in this country, and sometimes it's deserved, and sometimes it's completely unfair. Sure. If you're coming in after a disaster, everybody's unhappy to begin with.
Right.
So you're not coming in on a time where everybody wants to sit down and have a cup of coffee with you. They want something because they're desperate. Sure. And things don't always get handled the way that the victims would like. So they've got a very difficult job, but that flood map is pretty good. And you can go on there and put your address in, see what the water level would be at your house. And they're working on making that easier to understand. And they need to keep improving that because it still doesn't give you enough context to find out information, but it's a huge resource to go to. And, we had the FEMA director in our film. And when we sat down to talk to him, his PR person came to me and before Brock Long came in and said, how the hell did you get in here? Because FEMA gets such a bad rap, they would never let a filmmaker just wander in because they probably figured they're going to trash them. Well, sure. I got into FEMA because I told the PR guys, we want to help people avoid this. We're talking about being proactive. This is nothing about what FEMA does or about your work. It's about preventing you having to do your work. And they loved that angle. And so we got in to talk to them, and Brock Long was a superstar. He was one of the best interviews in the film. And so
I liked his sound bites. They were really good. And I appreciated what he had to say because I like, let's just say we're not always the biggest fan of the government around here, but there's certain things that if I had to choose, I wouldn't hate so much, but I love people that respond to emergencies. I think that's a service that is pretty good,
And he's a straight shooter. He'll tell you what they did well. He'll tell you what they didn't. And you have to think of any profession. There's people that are critical of first responders after disasters. They couldn't get here fast enough. They didn't do this. They didn't do that. Well, those people are doing heroic work, risking their lives to save us. But the dynamic's not equal. We're at our lowest point. We're desperate. We want help, and the help is there. So if it's not helping you the way you want, people get mad. And it's easy to do that, especially when it's emotional and you're in a tough situation. So I don't really want to criticize anybody, but FEMA does some good things, and there's things they can improve on.
There was a lady, I think this was in the documentary as well. It might have been Malibu, I can't remember, but it was during the wildfires, and she was getting pretty upset at, I think it was a city council meeting, where she talked about how they considered her community a let it burn scenario. And I mean, and again, you've got large scale disaster relief that has to deal with things by the numbers, but every person is an individual who has emotions and attachments to things, and it's tough. I mean, as an individual, it would be hard to deal with.
Well, that whole fire was a cluster because they had this thing called mutual aid where all the Malibu firefighters were pulled someplace else to help those people fight the fire before it got to Malibu. So you were having firefighters that were in that area that didn't know the area. And then they were saying, don't put this one out, let this one go. And she was livid hearing a firefighter say, we're going to have to let that one go, or we don't have enough resources to stop that fire. So there were people whose houses were burning to the ground while firefighters couldn't even find where they were because of all the streets and things. It was it was an absolute cluster where people lost their homes that didn't have to. And so there was a lot of frustration. Why aren't we her point was, why aren't we pulling water out of the Pacific and dumping it on houses? Why are you saying there's not enough water? And she was very passionate and upset, and I don't blame her.
No, I would be too. And I like that point about pulling it out of the Pacific, It's like people who have power outages and they let their food spoil in the freezer when it's minus 30 outside,
Yeah, there's a lot of questionable decisions that we all scratch our heads about. But in this instance, there's a lot of things in California we could learn. Okay, let's not do it that way. They're pretty good at that. Yeah.
So what's next for George? Where are you heading? I'm not sure what you can talk about for your projects coming up or anything, but where are you heading now? What do you got coming up?
Well, I have a podcast called Tell Us How to Make It Better. Okay. I'm not a 300 plus person like you, but I'm hoping to get there. We talk about warning signs and solutions for homeowners. So as somebody who's now had all the experiences that I've had and things that I realize can go wrong, I think there's things everybody can do to make their house better. And that's what we try to talk about in the podcast. Things you can do, things you can look for, things you could ask the builder to do, a lot of the stories that have happened to me. That's what the podcast is about. It's about those warning signs and solutions. And it's tellashowtomakeitbetter.com is where people can get that. And I hope people check it out. And then I'm working on 2 films right now that I'm in the process of raising money for them. One is going to be kind of an extension of The Last House Standing, but we're going to be looking more into building codes and why are people building houses that we know aren't safe? And why do we continue to have that? And why do we allow codes to be like that? So it's going to be more an in-depth look, less of the disaster and more of the, we can prevent these disasters just by being tougher and doing a better job. And then my other film is going to be about the families falling apart and the structure of families and how, things happen in every family. I don't think I've ever met anybody that doesn't have some major dysfunction in their family. Sure. And some of them paralyze the family and they never recover and they fracture and everybody goes their own direction. And then other people pull it together and hold it together. What's the difference? Why can one work and one not? And we're going to explore that because I've experienced it myself. I've seen it through a lot of friends, and I think we can do a better job collectively. So let's learn what we can do.
How do you fund those? Do you do like Kickstarters, or do you just go to like a studio, or what's your kind of thing?
Well, the first one, the one about the building codes and disasters, we're going through a nonprofit that's helping raise the money. My partner, Eris Papadopoulos, who's a big resilience guy, and he was in the film. Eris is one of the great voices in that film that really has a lot of important things to say. And so I'm working with him for that. And then the family one, we're actually putting together a business plan. And that film is going to show people they can make money by investing in it because it's completely different. It's not, a nonprofit. The goal is to get the film out there. This has a combination. We're going to get the film out there, but we want to get a celebrity to be in the film and voice it. And we want to show people there's going to be a business plan that you can invest money in and you can make your money back plus some.
I've seen that recently. That's becoming a bit of a thing. And I really appreciate that. It's a way. Yeah. And because again, it's a no guaranteed return on your investment, but it's a way to invest in things that a person is passionate about. And I appreciate that.
Yeah, it's hard to guarantee in the film industry because look at Hollywood loses hundreds of millions of dollars on films. So you can't tell somebody, I promise you're going to make money. So you have to look at the person and go, do I believe that they know what they're doing? And do I have confidence that they have a plan? And I can say that, in my situation, at my age and the things that I want to do, I can't afford failures at this point in my life. So if I'm doing it, I've got 2 documentaries under my belt. They've won awards. They're getting seen. This next one is going to be great, and I think it's going to be just as important as The Last House Standing. But my other film about families, I know it's going to be successful. Can I tell you you're going to make a fortune on it? I couldn't tell you that, but I intend to.
So what's the easiest way to follow up with you, and how can people support you, George?
Well, if they go to movetheworldfilms.org is my film site.
Okay.
And if they have any ideas, if they have any suggestions for things, any comments, that's where my films live, on that website. And then, the Last House Standing has its own website, as we talked about earlier, thelasthousestanding.org. And then my podcast, I'm always looking for guests. If any of the folks listening have a horror story or an interesting story about something that's gone wrong with something they've done, whether it's construction, preparation, things that they were doing, reach out to me through tellashowtomakeitbetter.com. There's a contact form on there, and I'd love to have them on the podcast to talk about it, because
Nice.
I know there's a lot of people that have those stories. Most people don't want to hear about them. I do, because I'm fascinated by them, and I would love to share your story with people. I was talking to a woman the other day who gave a pool company $100,000 to build her pool, and they disappeared.
Oh,
She's not coming on the podcast because she said to me, "Do you think it's okay to come on and talk about it?" I said, "You got to go see a lawyer first, because you could get in a lot of trouble trashing this guy." Because I would have loved to have the content, but I also care about people to the point that I don't want to be the reason she doesn't get what her family deserves, which is their money back. But if it's a story that I think we can get away with talking about, I'd absolutely love to hear it from folks, because I know there's some great ones out there.
Well, thank you, George. I really appreciate it. I'd love down the road to have you back on sometime, especially when the next kind of documentary ends up coming out. I can tell people really enjoyed your conversation, and somebody in the Telegram group earlier went and listened to your podcast, said you were an excellent storyteller, and they weren't lying. So thank you very much.
Well, you have a very kind audience. I mean, it's hard to get feedback, and if people like what I have to say, I appreciate it, because I realize there's so many choices for people to listen to or talk,
Yes.
To hear, and it's very competitive. But there's things that I'm very passionate about, and I love to share them. You just hope you can find people that want to listen and consume it, so it's a benefit to them. So I appreciate it. Anybody that said anything kind tonight, thank you. And if you said something bad, that's your right too. Thank you. Thanks to Tim for weeding that out and not sharing it with me. But that happens too. Anytime you put yourself out there, you're going to get haters. It's just part of the flow.
Perfect. If you want to hang for just a second in the background, I'll close up. I'll be right back with you, and we can finish.
Thank you.
No, thanks again. Guys, I hope you appreciated that. George and his PR people reached out to me to come on the show, and to be honest, you just never know. And I was blown away. I looked into what he talked about, and I hope you guys appreciated as much as I did his expertise. A great conversationalist, a great storyteller, and beyond that, you can tell he's legitimately passionate about what he talks about. So, guys, make sure you show him the workshop love. Get out and support him. I always tell you don't have to listen to my podcast. You can listen to anybody. So give him a listen. Give him a follow. All of that. Any way you can support people. I put all his links in the description. I believe there's Instagram, TikTok, and a whole host of others. So get out there, support him. And guys, I always appreciate you. As always, stay happy, stay healthy, and have a great week.